Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the 2014 Technology Exchange Day 3. And today we'll conclude the general session with some great talks. Actually, last night I couldn't sleep after watching the game, so I started saying, you know, all the reasons why I like being here. And I came up with around 500 of them, and I thought, what do I name that list? I won't share it with you. I was going to call it something unique like Indy 500, but then, you know. Anyway, regardless of that, before we begin, I would like to remind you that there is a mystery word hunt game in the sponsor salon. It's still going on, and the prizes are still to be given out. So if you want those prizes, please go to the mobile app and visit the sponsors to win. So please do that. Again, I will want to thank you. Enjoying this whole space, everything because of sponsors. There are 24 sponsors this year, the platinum one being Fortinet. And the sponsor display hall is open till 5 p.m. There are also a bunch of gold and silver sponsors, Aspera with IBM, Juniper, Matrix, and Oracle. So please go visit all the sponsor booths, make them feel happy, at least see what they are here to talk about. So on Monday, you remember that I got up and we talked about the ESNET Diversity Award winner. And one of the award winners, Julie Peterson, was not here with us on Monday. I'm sure she has joined us today, and I would like her to stand up and be recognized. So Julie, if you're here, please stand. OK, I cannot see. So OK, she's in the back there, please. Thank you for coming, Julie. So also, there was a bunch of scholarships that were awarded this year by vendors. So there were from two of our generous sponsors, Brocade and Cisco. So I would like to invite Bob Bregant II and David Rayner from Cisco to join me on stage. Bob is a senior IT security engineer in University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and David Rayner is from Cisco. So please come join us. So Bob, this is a certificate, and please thank you, everyone. So thank you for joining us. Thank you for your scholarship. Thank you for coming to Jointex. So we have Jerry Razor, who is a senior IT systems engineer from University of Alabama in Huntsville, and he was sponsored by Brocade. So I would invite Jerry and Catherine Helgeson from Brocade to please join me on the stage. I don't see Catherine here. So welcome. Congratulations. Oh, Catherine. From the other side. OK. Why don't you give? Thanks. Thank you. So you are in for a treat today. We'll be starting today with a truly amazing panel who will discuss the future of security. I know that is important to all of you. So we would like to thank Indiana University's Brad Wheeler, who has put this dynamic set of experts together. And I would like to invite Brad Wheeler to please come to the stage to introduce the panelists. Now, Dr. Brad Wheeler is the Vice President of IT and CIO at Indiana University, where he leads universities-wide IT services for IU's 8 campuses. So welcome. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you.
It's yours.
Well, I hope you're enjoying Indianapolis. It's our honor to be the host institution for what has been a fabulous technology exchange. I hope our next panel stirs the mind a little bit as we think about the challenges of privacy and security and that ever-sensitive changing balance between them. We know that it's a delicate interwoven thread of things that we do in law, things that we do in policy, things that we do in technology, and just that personal behavior of that user who keeps clicking on stupid things that he or she should not do. So we've assembled a world-class group of experts for this panel. It is not scripted. We're going to be debating each other a little bit and explore this territory. So to begin, it is my extreme honor to welcome Congressman Lee Hamilton to the stage. Lee, please come on up. I want to shake this gentleman's hand. Lee, have a seat. Congressman Hamilton is truly an honorable congressman. He served in Congress for 34 years. We wish it was 36. He was the co-chair or vice chair of the 9/11 Commission. He is, if you'll look in the CV available for him, he continues to advise the White House, CIA. He's been involved in so many national matters of great prominence, and he is truly one of Indiana's greatest statesmen as a congressman, and we are honored to have Lee here with us today. Second, I want to invite Dr. Carrie Gates to come up and join us. Carrie is the Chief Scientist for Research at Dell. Carrie, welcome. Have a seat. Carrie's role is research and conducting research about advanced cybersecurity to the product lines that Dell is working on and innovating. And if you know, Dell is such a great story as an American technology company. Michael Dell recently took the firm private again, which gives them tremendous flexibility in what they're trying to do. Carrie liaises with lots of universities on cybersecurity matters because, as you know, the technology focus these days, a lot of it is highly connected across the network, highly connected to clouds and servers and such. So this isn't a matter of a nicety going on in Dell. This is a mission critical part of the products that Dell is going to be putting out there and we're going to be carrying around and using over time. And our third panelist is the amazing distinguished professor, Fred Cate, from Indiana University's Maurer School of Law. It's easy to keep up with Fred Cate. Just open up USA Today, listen to NPR, open up the Financial Times. Seemingly every week, there is a Cate quote somewhere regarding what's going right and going wrong with cyber law. Fred was the founding director of the Center for Applied Cybersecurity Research at Indiana University, where he continues as a deputy director or chief scientist, a principal researcher, whatever title we finally kept you in the center with. And this panel, we're going to look a little bit more deeply in this ever-changing role of privacy, policy, law, and security. So let me open up with just maybe a bit of a comment. It's been a pretty interesting last 18 months or so. Edward Snowden became a household name, suggesting that maybe we didn't all know what was going on with our government and some of its operations. Some of you may have received email from Chase Bank recently suggesting, oops, something had happened there. One of my colleagues who had shopped at Home Depot found out he could not pay for his dinner the other night because his credit card had been canceled for purchases that clearly were not his all of a sudden. So I'll just ask our panel, maybe just as an opening comment, what stands out to you in the last, say, 12, 18 months that has really raised your consciousness about cybersecurity and privacy issues? Anything that really pops to your mind that you want to start with?
Well, it's been an amazing few months, incredible few months, because we had for a period of about a decade or more, NSA and other governmental intelligence agencies developing all of this remarkable capability to surveil and to monitor what you do. And we really didn't know about it, most of us at least. And then with the Snowden revelations, the government began to confess about what they were doing, but they've still got a long way to go at that point. But just think of how much we have learned in the past few months about the astounding capabilities to interfere with your privacy. I sometimes think we've lost the battle of privacy. That if a given entity, whether it's a U.S. intelligence agency or not, wants to find out everything there is to know about you, I think they can do it, probably. And it's good to talk about the balance between liberty and security and privacy and security. But right now, the momentum is on the side of the folks who want to keep track of you.
But Lee, who's minding the store? Who's protecting and saying how far is far enough and no, that's too far? We've got FISA courts, we've got congressional oversight, we have checks and balances in our system of government. Who's minding the store of watching the watchers?
Well, the traditional balances of our system, the checks and balances, simply have not worked. And they have not worked because there has not been enough transparency, openness, accountability in the system. Now, if you put that question to President Obama, he would say we have within the executive branch a lot of checks. And I'm sure they do, and that's commendable. But they didn't want any of us to know about it for 10 years or 15. And they had the attitude, trust me, security is too important for you folks to know much about it. And so they didn't tell us. Now, I think it's commendable that the executive branch has its own checks within that branch of government, but it's not sufficient. And in our system of government, you have a balance of power, a separation of powers. And what we have seen over these past few years is that the Congress and the courts were too deferential to the executive branch and gave them about everything they wanted, approved about everything they wanted. It's changed a little bit now as the debate has picked up publicly, but not very much. Fundamentally, it's still the same. So my attitude is that for this system to work correctly, you have to have more transparency, you have to have more accountability. But most importantly, I don't see how you can get real checks and balances on the capabilities of the intelligence community, NSA particularly, without robust congressional oversight on an ongoing basis and robust action by the courts on an ongoing basis. They have not performed to my satisfaction by a long shot. I hope they will begin to up their game, and if they don't, the executive branch is just going to riot all over you, no matter who's in power.
So if we make this a very practical example, and I'm going to call on Fred because he can probably update me on a conversation we had maybe a year ago or so. Let's say one of my network engineers is at Starbucks, getting his 13th coffee for the day, and someone comes up and says, hey, I'm from the federal government and I need you to show me such and such thing going on in your network. Now, his normal responsibility might be, oh, well, just a minute, I got to check with my supervisor, and this is really freaking me out. I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do here. What are the rules of that interaction? Who can he tell? How far can it go? And this gets to some of the FISA court things that we talked about a year ago. Walk me through, what would happen if a federal person came up to one of my network engineers or someone here in the audience? What happens next?
Are there any federal people in the audience?
Hypothetically speaking.
Yes. Well, I mean, the news hasn't really changed much in the past year, which is, under the law as it stands now, the government has a number of powers, all of which are executed in secret for obvious reasons, and they limit who you can tell when you've been asked to provide information.
So can he go ask his supervisor if logging in and showing the passwords and all is okay or not?
No. I think the answer right now is clearly no. There are only two exceptions to the you can't tell anybody rule. One, which was created by courts responding to prior challenges in this area, says you can now consult a lawyer. So consulting your lawyer, consulting the general counsel in the case of a university employee is now expressly permitted. Let me be clear, that's a change. In other words, under the interpretation of the Bush administration, Attorney General Ashcroft, that was not permitted. But then a court intervened and said, wait a minute, that's not legal. And so referring to your lawyer is permitted. The second is you can consult anyone necessary to provide the information. So for example, if you say, well, I don't have the password to that account, but Joe has the password, so we'll have to tell Joe, that would be permitted. But for example, telling you would not be permitted unless you had the only access to the information.
Yeah, I really want to drive this point home because this was shocking to me when I learned this about 18 months ago. That you normally, if we receive a warrant from the court or some action by the FBI or something, there's very well documented processes at the university, how that would work, who gets involved, how a decision is made to honor that or to say, no, we don't respect that, we're going to fight that and such. But in this case, my engineers or other people could be approached and would be told that they would face criminal prosecution, if I have my term correctly, if they did not go with that agent to log in and gather that particular piece of information. Could not consult university counsel, could not consult their supervisor, could not consult me. So to Lee's point, the courts corrected the executive interpretation of that law, but we've got a ways to go on that. Does that make you a bit nervous? It certainly made me very, very nervous.
Well, and let me say also with regard to Lee's earlier point, the role of courts here has been mixed. I think we would have to say. So on the one hand, we've had some very courageous courts, when given the opportunity, have really stepped in and said there are going to be limits and we're going to enforce them. At the same time, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, and to my mind, this was the most striking revelation that came out of all of the Snowden revelations. It wasn't that the government was doing all of the surveillance, it's that a court had actually authorized it. Mm-hmm. That the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court had interpreted a very clear law written by Congress that said you can only get this information if it is relevant to an authorized investigation. I think we could, in this room, agree almost with precision about what relevant to an authorized investigation meant. But somehow the judges of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court interpreted that to mean that dialing information on every phone call made in America over 7 years would somehow be relevant to an authorized investigation. And it was that breakdown in oversight which, to my mind, was the most shocking.
Brad, let me just interject here. Carrie, I'm sorry to go ahead of you here, but this is the largest expansion of government power in my lifetime. This is an extraordinary exercise of government power to monitor everything you do. Your phone calls, every time you use that computer that's in front of everybody in this room now except me, somebody knows what you're doing out there. Now, this has come about at a time when the country has been very skeptical of government and has not wanted government to do a lot of things that governments often do or traditionally have done. And it occurred without a whimper from the United States Congress. In other words, members of Congress made the judgment that this expansion of government power could be done secretly without a public debate. And I just find that appalling from my way the system ought to work.
So I'm looking at an image here that shows the public internet as a cloud. It shows Google as a cloud, and it shows an insertion point of a Google front-end server that we saw in the news not too long ago regarding a break in where SSL was added or removed, secure socket layer encryption, as traffic went in and out. And to the point Lee made and Fred has made, we have learned over the last couple of years that there's been a parade of companies who have felt that they had to be complicit in some of this under federal pressure of what information they were giving up as well. So that takes us to Carrie and the products that Dell is going to provide that will fix personal privacy and offer us the assurance of that in the future.
What are you making me promise on stage here?
So can you tell us a little bit just about a company's orientation to this world of a network out there where the traditional reasons we thought we were secure through encryption and certain policies and behavior has just been horribly compromised in the eyes of anyone paying attention. So how does a company think about products in the future with this backdrop?
All right, well, first of all, you have to consider which company are you talking about when you think, how is a company feeling about this going forward? Companies that are in the business of providing security devices, providing privacy, more so would say security. I can't name any companies that I would say offhand, this company makes a lot of money based on privacy software. Please go buy privacy software and make that actually be a change. But companies are motivated by money. So it's very much an economic argument. If you want to be able to have security, if you want privacy, then you have to pay for it. And if you're not buying it, then companies are not going to be making it. There are legal ramifications. If the government comes to a company and says, you must do this, then I don't know what recourse companies often have in that case. And I know it's been interesting to watch the news because oftentimes companies will put out things and then law enforcement will go, oh, wait, but you're doing that hampers us in this way. I believe Apple had a product recently where they were talking about encryption and law enforcement had a very not as positive response to what they were providing.
But isn't the bargain changing? So I go to Kroger or to Marsh, and they want me to be registered for their something program, and I get 13 cents off on a loaf of bread. And because I'm such a shrewd consumer, it's like, hey, for 13 cents, you can know all about me. You can know all about my grocery basket and which brand of beer or wine I buy and how much of this I consume. So we've made a bargain that I consented to let them identify Brad Wheeler to this basket of groceries, and I've consented with never reading a thing, that they can accumulate that over years to know everything about me, but at least a bargain was made. And then we read in the last week or two that, as you're writing those documents on your new operating system from Apple, it's actually saving those drafts in the cloud without notifying you. And that's a service, it's protecting you, but you never gave consent to have your information aggregated to the iCloud service. So what is the bargain going forward with companies and products and informed consent that is not, word barf by lawyers in things that you scroll through? Fred is an author of word barf, I assume, being a legal scholar yourself. But what's the bargain?
I was hoping you were still asking Carrie that question.
Well, and I actually have a bit of an answer.
Please, go right ahead.
There's actually research being done on privacy policies and how you can present those to consumers such that it's easy to see what you are agreeing to. And there's actually a presentation at Grace Hopper a couple of weeks ago by someone, unfortunately I don't remember her name, but she was talking exactly about here's how you can present that information. And it was very simple. It's little blocks and it says, we will give your information to, and the green blocks were who it would give it to, and the red blocks were who they would not give it to. Extremely simple, and you could click to find out here's all the legalese behind it, but it at least provided a way for someone who's otherwise not going to read any of this to see what's happening.
But aren't the financial incentives for a company, you take Facebook or someone else, they say, here's the privacy bargain, and you go, wow, I actually read all that, which no one does, but it seems reasonable. Smart people read it and they go, we don't like it, but it's reasonable. And then 6 months you log in, and there's a new bargain. Then 6 months later you log in, and there's a new bargain. And it's going from very little red to green, 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 that we're giving away our rights for these things.
Well, I think this suggests the problem of the bargain approach to privacy. In other words, that's a uniquely US feature. In fact, it's unique to privacy. So when you go into Best Buy and you say, I want to buy that TV, you don't bargain over it. You don't say,
wait,
well...
I do, actually, but keep going.
You don't bargain over, will it work, for example. There are consumer laws that say, if it won't work, they can't sell it to you. Or you don't bargain over, is it only going to work for 3 days, or are you going to change the deal after that? So it's only in privacy that we have said, largely because we didn't know what else to do, and largely because it was very advantageous to the people who wanted to collect and use the data, we'll provide notices that nobody will read in the history of the internet, We will provide these notices in ways that they cannot be read. So for example, every time I update my iPhone, I get, it used to be 56, it's now up to 65 screens of notice.
Word barf.
Which if, by the way, I click no, I will not accept this, I've now turned my iPhone into a brick. It's useful only as a doorstop or perhaps a coaster to sit a beverage on. It has no other value to me because I won't accept the operating terms and they won't give me back my old service under the old operating terms.
Now, you make the point this is somewhat uniquely a US phenomenon and approach. I assume you're referring to the Europeans have a little more rigorous viewpoint on privacy than we typically do.
I am, and by the way, let me say it's not just Europe, it's most of Asia now, and a good part of Latin and South America, and by the way, Africa is starting to adopt a more rigorous approach to privacy. But my point's not to say whether one is better than the other. I mean, there are a lot of arguments to say, look, Europe has fine laws, they just never enforce them. So is that a higher standard than it is, for example, in the United States? It's more to say that it's time that we start looking for some baseline privacy protection that says this is the deal provided by law, as opposed to you're on your own negotiating to see if you can work out a deal that won't be changed 6 months down the road.
Yeah, well, there's no negotiating when you have no power. I mean, so there's really no, as you say, they can change the privacy policy every day.
Well, and even more to the point, most consumers don't have much interest at the time they are making the consumer choice. They have the interest later when they're not dazzled by the new technology and tremendously excited by the new app or the new machine they're taking out of the box. And that's when we need to know protection will be there. By that point, you've already agreed to the shrink wrap license, or you've already clicked I accept when you download the new app.
Yeah, and I have to say, I'm a little annoyed if I go to Amazon.com and I shop because I need to buy a new shower head to replace a shower head. And so I decided I'm not going to buy one today. And then for the next 3 weeks, every time I open the New York Times or the Washington Post, it's all ads about shower heads. And so it's not even how I negotiate with Amazon for what the privacy policy will be. Now, all of a sudden, my behavior is showing up in the New York Times when I read it. I find that a little icky. Lee, can't Congress do something about this?
They can, but they won't. Look, two things. The intelligence community believes that megadata is critical, gathering it, collecting it, is critical to the national security of the United States. Don't ask me to explain this in detail, but they collect all of this enormous amounts of data, something like 150 boxcars of data per day. Unbelievable amounts. Their problem is not collection, their problem is analysis of the collection. But having said that, they will make the argument very forcefully, and the national security community will as well, that we have to have this data, and by sorting through it with our algorithms, or however you describe that, we can identify terrorists or potential terrorists. So they make that argument very strongly. I believe that argument has carried the day. In other words, I do not believe we're going back to the pre-megadata collection day. They've carried the day on that. So the real question becomes, can you constrain it in some way? The Congress has, Fred probably knows more about this than I, but the House has passed a bill, and the Senate has a bill coming out of committee, but not yet on the floor of the Senate. Is that right?
That is right.
Fred? And those are the first efforts to push back. The laws have a lot of loopholes in them. They're not very tough laws from my standpoint, but they are a step forward by the Congress. In other words, Congress is saying, we better get into the action here. They're 10 years late, but they're saying we better get into the action here. Now, the Senate bill is on the calendar when they come back after the election, but whether or not it'll be acted on in that 2 or 3 weeks they're in session depends on a lot of things. And it may very well be that the legislation will go over into the next Congress, which means you have to start all over again. But anyway, there is some sign of a pushback, but it's pretty mild. On the courts, Fred, you can speak to that better than I, but they are showing some willingness to push back. And I think those are positive signs in the overall situation.
But every fan of law and order knows that we've long also had a bargain and an agreement about privacy and search and seizure. You know, the police can't go into the bad guy's home because they don't have probable cause, they don't have a warrant to get in there, because we have a view of liberty in this nation, and privacy and liberty. But in this whole digital domain, it's very, very different. People can get in to see without actually any action of a warrant whatsoever. Fred, you were telling me a story a moment ago in Las Vegas. What was it that happened there?
Yeah, so this was reported on NPR this morning that the FBI in Las Vegas were wanting to find out information about a high roller gambler from China who was staying at Caesars. And so they couldn't get in lawfully. So they cut his internet connection, literally cut the wires outside his hotel room, and then knocked on the door saying that they were there to repair the internet connection, and then subsequently didn't tell the court when they used that information to apply for a warrant that that's what they had done. They just said that somebody had observed this various paraphernalia around the person's room, not that they had engaged in this subterfuge to do it. And this is an example of something that I think is clearly illegal. I don't think there's any question about what it's illegal. I suspect a court will say it's illegal, but for some reason they thought they could get away with it. And it's something about this, as Lee talks about, this kind of new unprecedented power that is in the hands of the government that I think is making the government feel that it can try things that it would not have tried in an ordinary world, we would hope.
So let's up the game here a little bit. I've been whining about those showerhead ads in the New York Times for me, but I want to read from a story that was in the Wall Street Journal yesterday, a short excerpt here, just to talk about the struggles the feds are having in this real game of trying to keep us secure. So here we go. Earlier this year, investigators for Silicon Valley security company FireEye visited a U.S. firm to determine who and what sneaked into the firm's network harboring military secrets. There they found what they called a sophisticated cyber weapon, able to evade detection and hop between computers walled off from the internet. The spy tool was programmed on Russian language machines and built during working hours in Moscow. FireEye's conclusion in a report to be released Tuesday, the cyber spying has a government sponsor, specifically a government based in Moscow. That might narrow it down somewhat. The report is one of 4 recent assessments by cybersecurity companies, buttressed by reports from Google and the U.S. intelligence agencies, pointing to Russian sponsorship of skilled hacking campaign dating back to 2007. Targets included NATO, governments of Russia's neighbors, U.S. defense contractors, science applications and international corp, and Academi, formerly Blackwater. Collectively, the new research offers evidence supporting a view long expressed privately by U.S. officials and American security researchers. Moscow commands an A-team of internet adversaries. China, often the object of recent U.S. allegations of cyber spying, says China may hack more often, U.S. officials say, but Russia hacks better. I worry a lot more about the Russians than China, America's top spy and Director of National Intelligence, James Clapper, said at the University of Texas Forum this month. And he goes on to talk about differentiating between the tools that are being used. So on one hand, we talk about consumer-grade engagements in the public internet. We also worry greatly about our security. And Lee, you were, again, vice chair of the 9/11 Commission and the Iraq Study Group. These are very, very real threats of people running around using these public services in many ways to organize.
If you ask most national security experts today, what's the #1 threat confronting the country? Almost all, not all, almost all will say it's cyber threat. It's a little hard because when you pick up the papers today, it's all about ISIS and the jihadist threat and so forth. But I think our national security community has become very much aware of the fact that the law lags way behind the threat, and that we are being attacked by the Russians or the Chinese or by some brilliant teenager somewhere just all the time, to the extent of tens of thousands of attacks every day. Okay, now what do you do about all of this? Let me make two suggestions. I think, first of all, you need a national cyber commission, which both private and public, bringing together experts to see and to assess and to evaluate this threat, whether it's showerheads or whatever, Brad. And that would be a temporary commission that would do the work that government should have been doing but has not been done thus far. And we would learn how serious this threat is. We would find out, I believe, that it's very, very serious. But we need a kind of an official evaluation. And that could come from a commission. Then, in addition to that, you need a cyber center. This would be permanent, an operational center which would spread the word about cyber offenses and cyber defenses. It would be a place where the private sector could come and say, what in the world do I do about this attack? Can you help me or can you not? It would be a place where the experts could share views and put them into operation within the government. Now, the problem here in a governmental sense is that there are just too many actors at the present time. You need to unify, you need to get a unity of effort to deal with this problem, and we're not there yet.
But Lee, isn't the challenge of this, the pace of these mechanisms is just mismatched. Carrie is going to release her 14th product, an evolution, by the time the committee would get organized to have a hearing. And the issue that was brought before them from the third generation, the issues are vastly different. Just the pace of these things are so at odds with each other.
Well, that's exactly right. The government cannot expect to keep up with that kind of a pace. We just got to get a little closer than we are today. And these mechanisms I'm suggesting give us a way to begin to attack the problem. And we have to keep in mind, Brad, what you said, and that is the technology here, it's an arms race in terms of offense and defense, it seems to me. And it's not going to be static. I mean, it's going to be changing all the time. We just have to do the best we can to create the mechanisms in government so that we can evaluate what's happening, so that we can know what's happening. Now, incidentally, Carrie, a lot of the things I'm suggesting here create a problem for the private sector, because the private sector may not want to share some of that information. And that creates a real problem, because the government suspects the Chinese or the Russians are hacking us or whomever, and you say, well, I want to protect our secrets, I want to protect whatever it is the private sector wants to protect, I'm not going to tell you. How do we get the private sector to open up and share information? And how do we get the government to open up and share information of the private sector? Because the technology here, a lot of it, the most sophisticated technology, is in NSA and a number of government agencies. So that sharing becomes a critical part of it, so we can evaluate the threat.
And that's been a point of progress. I recall, again, roughly about 18 months ago, the Financial Times wrote a piece saying, companies, you've got to come forward. You're all getting hacked, and you're afraid to come forward and say you've been hacked because you don't want it to affect your stock price. So there's this culture of silence, and so information isn't being shared about what was the vector of the hack, what happened. Now, you're following the law if you have to notify over credit card numbers and things like that, but it's hard to get ahead when the private sector is incented financially to be pretty tight-lipped about these things.
I am going to give you a counterexample on that. There are things called ISACs, I-S-A-C, I forget what they stand for. FS-ISAC, which is financial sector, for example, has a very, very good method. IS is at least information sharing. And they will meet and compare notes, but it's very much just financial sector. It's based very much on trust relationships. And so they're not worried that anything that they say might end up on the front page of the New York Times.
Yep. And we have the Research and Education Network, Information Sharing and Analysis Center as well, an ISAC in our sector managed by this community. Now, to up the game, I want to read one more paragraph from that article, which I think, in the US, we think a lot about this stuff. What the heck is the federal government doing and spying and on our civil liberties? And then, oh, you've got these criminals over here too. You got the mafia and you got this and that. But here's a paragraph which I thought was interesting. US officials said, differentiating between Russian criminal hackers and government hackers is difficult because the government uses cyber surveillance tools created by the criminal groups, and the criminals use tools developed by the government.
Yeah, so this conversation is, by the way, I still want to comment on the Twitter feed, which is up here, one of which has passed already, which was, can't we send Congressman Hamilton back to Congress?
Yes.
I would endorse that.
Yes.
So this is the, if nothing else, this is the beginning of a groundswell campaign.
A write-in campaign next week.
Exactly right. There's so many issues here on the table. So one is it's very difficult for the United States to target other foreign governments when we do the same thing. And that is just a tricky issue. And we say, well, we don't do it to private industry. We only spy on governments. We don't do it to industry. But then it turns out, you know, we broke into Google servers, and we broke into Huawei servers, and we broke into Yahoo servers. And the last time I checked, those are all industry. And so we say, well, but we aren't doing it to spy on industry. We're doing it to spy on government officials that use those private sector providers, and that's just an untenable position to maintain. There's no legal distinction. There's no treaty that acknowledges that. That is a totally novel, a political assertion that has no legal backing. So one is we've got to clean up our act if we're interested in others cleaning up theirs. If we think that is a distinction worth maintaining, then we should try to get it recognized in international law, not just in you know, the White House. It's got to have broader sway than that. Second, the point that's been made, which is again a compelling one, as always when Lee is speaking, about the need to take action. The fact that we're going to lag behind, which is true, is not reason for not acting. And we've used as an excuse for too long in government to say, well, government can't really do anything effective here. So you may remember when President Obama came into office, one of the first things he did was this 60-day, top-to-bottom cybersecurity review. And it came out with a very stinging criticism of how far behind we were in effective cybersecurity. So what did the president do? He appointed a coordinator. Right. Well, a coordinator is the guarantee that nothing will be done. I mean, that is the absolute certainty. If you, by the way, if your title is coordinator, I'm sorry, but it is absolutely certain you have no authority, no budget, and no power if you're a coordinator.
It's kind of like a czar.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So the fact that we're behind is not a reason to say we shouldn't be taking meaningful action. You know, rather than getting farther behind every day, we might start narrowing some of that distance. And then the third on the information sharing point, it's funny, I mean, in Congress right now, there actually are two bills in the Senate, one dealing with the question of oversight of government surveillance, the other dealing with information sharing for cybersecurity. And they're kind of being held hostage to each other. So the privacy community is saying no more information sharing until we get some real protection on surveillance. The surveillance people are saying, wait a minute, we'll never get this cybersecurity thing worked out, but we'll never get the surveillance thing worked out, but at least give us the information sharing.
Are you suggesting Congress doesn't have people who know how to make a deal? Is that a lost art from the Hamilton era?
I'm suggesting that the incentives for making the deal aren't good enough right now.
Okay, you guys have thoroughly convinced me that law is going to be tough. It's going to be a long slog to get there for law. policy. We don't even really know what policy we want, other than I don't want my shower heads in the New York Times. Then privacy, the ability to manage that's going to be extremely difficult. So are we down to really the last option is the technology itself? Can we make the technology itself strong enough to enable our civil liberties and our privacy? And we're worried right now that some of the key algorithms have been compromised to even know whether you can trust keys anymore. So Carrie, you're a cybersecurity researcher. Is the technology itself our last great hope if the economics and the policy and the law will
No
do it?
pressure.
Give me hope here.
I think technology will help. I don't think that it's going to be possible to develop technology that meets everyone's expectations and desires, because I think there are too many conflicting expectations and desires. And so, for example, you don't want ads in the New York Times about shower heads when you go visit the New York Times, and yet someone else is making money off of your information, so they don't want to stop that either. And you can secure your information from their side, and they think that they're secure. From your perspective, no, that's doing something that's against what I want. And the technology can support both. But I think it really comes down to two things, economics and government.
Yeah, and so with my business school professor hat on, I think this is one of the challenges that we've got is, in general, we pay for things. You want beer? You generally buy it and pay for it. And so we built a whole economy of transactions. But in many cases, so many of these services are free. And it's well known. If it's free to you, you're not the customer, you're the bait. And many of us, we are willing to be the bait. We love that we get an amazing service with Google's Gmail and don't pay anything for it, and we can have a couple of accounts if we want to segment our lives, and it just keeps getting better and better, and we don't pay anything other than a few little annoying ads on the side from time to time. So as we move deeper into the technology and the pace that it goes at, it is a game of scale. We don't have 1,000 companies out there offering competing free email services that have different grades of privacy, and I could opt in. It's a kind of a winner take all. Just we go to an oligopoly as a market. And so they set the terms, and the terms are generally no privacy, and every keystroke you ever type is mine, all mine. Is there any hope of us getting back to something where I have some role with my technology, or this just is what it is?
Well, I'm a non-technologist, obviously.
So that you may have a good answer.
So, but I'll jump in where fools fear to tread. The answer to your question is no. Because if you develop a technique, a technology that encrypts something or other, that may last for a week or two or a few months, but they'll figure out a way to crack it. And that's the history of this thing. You cannot develop, thus far at least, any kind of technology that gives you any kind of a permanent assurance. Because the other side is also sophisticated with their technology, and they're going to match yours, if not exceed it. So can technology help? I'm sure it can. Is it the answer? I don't think so. Now, there's one other dimension to this that we have to look at, and that is you're dealing here with the world of intelligence. And intelligence is very secret, almost by nature. It has the most important national security secrets. You're not dealing here with educational policy or healthcare policy in this country, which can be widely debated. You're dealing here with some information that does need to be held secret. Now, the national security community usually ends up defining the information needed to be kept secret far more broadly than I'd define it. But you get into real questions here. But you are dealing with a subject that is hard to bring into the public debate because a lot of it is secret and should be kept secret in general. So that's a dimension here, Brad, that greatly complicates the public dialogue on this question. I believe oftentimes the national security community exploits this and says, you folks just don't understand the problem, you don't understand how serious the threat is. We do, you better let us handle it. I'm very skeptical of that argument, but on the other hand, there is something to it. And you do have this dimension of secrecy. So one of the things that the intelligence community has to do is to make very rigorous judgments about what must be kept secret and what can be put into the public domain. And what discourages me a little bit in the debate thus far, first of all, they didn't release any information. Then Snowden comes along, he releases it. That makes the president and it makes the national security community to respond. If you look at their initial responses after Snowden, a lot of the rhetoric is pretty good. In other words, they said the right thing. We got to be more open, we got to be more transparent, we got to reveal more secrets, and we got to enter into the public dialogue. I mean, we can buy that. What's happened? The president hadn't said anything for months on this topic. And NSA said all the right things initially, and they haven't said anything. In other words, they're clamming up at this point. And whereas I thought for a while they were prepared to enter into a public dialogue, I'm not so sure. That tells me that they think they're winning the game. In other words, they don't need to do much. I think that's where their mind is. Now, that's why these pieces of legislation pending in the Congress are very important. They're a long shot from being perfect, but they're a wedge. They get your foot in the door, and they can become a platform in the future for refinement of the law that is more protective.
I think Fred has been on an interesting point. If you read Fred's advocacy of many positions, and it is a lot about transparency. So even that improvement in the FISA court, whereas one of my engineers or somebody who runs servers, whatever, was approached by someone from NSA, before the court's refined interpretation, couldn't even consult counsel, couldn't consult me. But just a little bit of that being dragged into the daylight brought an improved ruling. I guess FISA court's not much in the daylight, but brought an improved ruling. And I think these are important points of how much of this is in the daylight, because we can self-correct a little bit as a society and a government when things are visible, but when things are so hidden, we really can't. So in our closing minutes here, I want to give each panelist a moment to comment. I'm going to start with Fred on this notion of privacy and security, literally in a post-Snowden world of what we know about now. What do you think is important for the next year for Americans as a society, and maybe in particular, if you could shape it in any way? This is the group that runs one of the fastest, most capable networks in the entire world, serving a core mission of education and research. So over the next year, what comes to mind to you about the road ahead and anything that might be particularly applicable to these folks?
Well, maybe three quick points. One is you build in as much privacy as possible, and whether that's good encryption or whether that's strong policy or whether that's not having the data so you can't provide it either for a hacker to steal or for the government to come demand, that seems pretty important. The second is, I think we as a community have not done a very good job helping to both support and encourage our lawmakers to take a stronger position on this. Let's face it, there's been lots of outrage, but very little action. And if you look at national polls, the numbers have moved very little in a significant way.
Mm-hmm. They've moved in the direction of more emphasis on security and privacy.
I think they have. I think we've seen a little bit of a boomerang on this issue. And so we really need to focus in on that. And I think the third point is we need to not lose sight of the cybersecurity challenge, because frankly, we can keep our eye on privacy and we can keep our eye on the government, but if at the same time our data is being sucked out wholesale through no process at all.
Even as we type.
Right, through hackers, through sophisticated malware, through other attacks, none of this other stuff is frankly going to matter. We can be as secure as we want in our laws and in our relationships with our government. If at the same time the data is going anywhere, there's no control over it, then none of that's going to
Or even with one of our most venerable technology companies, Apple and iCloud,
Yes.
you know, vacuuming up our keystrokes without consent. Carrie.
I have to follow on that. That was very good. What would I add to that? I think that the cybersecurity problem, so we've touched on a number of things today, and it ranged all the way from nation-state security down to individual level privacy. And I think it's very difficult to tease apart all these different pieces. And I think that's one of the things we really need to do is say, here's where our national security issues are, here's where we need strong security. But does that mean that we need to collect all of this information at the individual level? And how is that then being protected? And it's not just at the nation, as the US, as a government collecting that information, but what's happening behind the scenes for companies collecting that information, and then reselling that information, people who are aggregating that information, and much of that stuff is not regulated at all. And so I think you would be more shocked by what is happening at by different companies and what's being collected and lack of privacy than what's happening at the government level.
Congressman.
Well, I believe that self-government is one of the grandest achievements in the history of mankind. I think it is a monumental achievement. We have a good system of government. You and I didn't do anything to make that possible, but we had it given to us. This system can work. It has not worked on these problems in the last decade or more, but it can work. So I want to see the fundamentals of our system of self-government activated and energized so that you have more transparency and more accountability and more balance of powers, courts, Congress, executive branch, looking into this question. I do not see how you get any kind of reasonable balance in this equation that you've put forward, Brad, without strong action by the Congress and the courts. They have information that you and I don't have with regard to intelligence and with regard to national security. And they have it before we have it, by a long shot, years oftentimes, and there's where you have to see some real improvement. This system of ours will work. Fred, your point about these people out here is really on the mark. You folks understand this technology far better than I do, and far, far better than any member of Congress. I'm sure, with a handful of exceptions. There would be some members of Congress who would be pretty well informed on these matters, but most of them not. You understand this technology, you understand its strengths, and you understand its weaknesses. And I think you have a very important responsibility to speak to your representatives and let them know what you think about what you've been talking about today, Brad, in order to make this system of ours work. The one thing I'm sure about is that members of Congress are responsive. They are responsive to their constituents, maybe not immediately, but over time they are. This system will work if we get it energized.
Well, Lee, you may have, or you may look at iPhones and clouds and all the devices that are lit up in the audience right now with some degree of mystery in understanding the details of how all of that works. But I assure you, we look to the Congressional Hall with greater mystery of trying to understand how it actually works. And I think you have more insight into a far more complex phenomenon than we do. I'll end our panel with my own closing remarks as a Chief Information Officer. At Indiana University, we embarked about 18 months ago on a cyber risk mitigation policy. And it follows the practice of saying, we don't let anyone in the university manufacture financial risk. Say, oh, we're an open university, let's just take credit cards anywhere in our department and such. We don't let people manufacture institutional risk to the finances of the university. But yet, because of the miracle and openness of technology in our culture, we have generally let all members of the academy manufacture cyber risk. Plug in a server, set it up in my lab. Yeah, I think my grad student patched it last fall. Is that true? Maybe it's been updated or not, and we find out it's been hacked and compromised. So we put in place a fairly rigorous cyber risk mitigation policy for schools and departments that are going through a self-review, 112 units going through their own self-study. And in general, one of the key things that we are doing in this is just reducing the surface area of the vectors for attack at Indiana University in compromised machines. We'll be saying a lot more about it. It's policy IT28, or Google Cyber Risk Mitigation, IU. And this is rolling across the entire university. You can't imagine doing something like this for an 8-campus complex, research-intensive university. But our faculty, our administrators understand the very, very real risks to our enterprise if we don't take cybersecurity as a serious matter in protecting the university. Let's give a hand to our great panel.
Okay, thank you, Brian.
And thank you. And for those of you in Indiana, the write-in campaign for Congressman Hamilton at the vote next week has begun. Lee is such an honorable member of Congress and continues, he's been leading the Center on Congress at Indiana University. We were honored to have Carrie and Fred with us today, and thank you for your attention and many tweets.
I think one more round of applause for this amazing panel, please. But I got inspired a little bit. I'm going to put that Indy 500 list of reasons on a website, and you will have a 28-page disclosure to sign before you can see that. And connect me to your LinkedIn and Facebook accounts as well. But that's okay. Anyway, so we'll continue our tech talk with Chris Dagg from BioTeam. I had a pleasure of having listened to him a few times, once at the Focus Technical Workshop, which Internet2 and ESNET organized on life sciences a few years ago. He did give a longer talk yesterday, the Trends of Trenches talk, but he'll be giving a condensed version of the story today. So please join me in welcoming Chris to the stage. Oh, there you are. And by the way, I just want to say that, he's the fastest and clearest spoken speaker I know. So I think, Guinness Book of World Records, you should try for that.
So on my talk yesterday, it was 81 slides in 40 minutes, and I finished 2 minutes early. So I'm going for the award this time around. I'm going to stun you with slides and try to get the prize for greatest number of slides in the shortest tech talk. So you might be wondering why they sort of schedule the biology nerd up here in the general session. So there's two sort of points I have to make in the next 20 minutes. One is that I'm firmly convinced that the next major deluge of users for internet Internet 2 and high-speed research networking is going to come out of the life science community. And our life science community is disparate. We're all over the world. We're all operating terabyte-scale instruments that go anywhere. So not only are we going to come at you in volume, we're going to come at you from a ton of different locations. The second thing is, on the assumption that I'm actually right about that hypothesis, this year, next year, a little bit down the road, I want to sort of give you some baseline understanding of the life science informatics world, so that when you start, looking up from your work and realize that, all these scruffy biologists are knocking at your door, you'll have a little bit of an understanding of what we're talking about and what we need. So I start these sort of talks by describing myself as a failed scientist. I'm of a certain age where I was trying to do computational biology in the 90s, and the software tools and the algorithms didn't exist. So all of the other baby bioinformaticists in the 90s, we all had to teach ourselves to code, and we all started writing software. Most of my colleagues went on to become adults and have productive, meaningful careers as scientists. I sort of took the dark side approach. Once I started writing scientific software, I needed big iron to run my code on. There was no one at the biotech who employed me who understood Unix. So I had a great, he was more of an enabler, but a great boss. He gave me $2 million from the R&D budget. I built the company's genomics data center. And so very, very quickly in the 90s, I made a career transition from wannabe scientist to very, very bad scientific software developer to an infrastructure and IT nerd who's really, for most of the last 20 years, I've been doing, high performance computing, informatics, and infrastructure for sort of really demanding R&D, open-ended discovery-oriented research environments. So, this is my first of 2 disclaimers. I'm infamous for speaking very, very quickly and having a ton of slides. I've already talked about the 81 I did. So the bad news is that if this topic interests you and you wanted to hear the long form of this talk, it already happened. The good news is that it was one of the recorded netcasts. So a week or so from now, it'll be up online. The other thing is the full set of slides are already up on SlideShare. I do have a lot of slides that I sort of throw at people as a kitchen sink or sort of as reference material. So I'm going to be clicking very, very fast through them. If you want the PDF, if you want the slides, they're already up online. So the second disclaimer is, technically speaking, I'm a suit. I'm a suit who's sort of invading this nice, open R&D, university-centric environment. And the reason, so there's 2 reasons for mentioning it, is that one is that I'm talking about my experiences in doing, production informatics. And generally speaking, I work mostly with industrial, biotech, pharmaceutical, startup companies. I do work with a number of the larger sort of R&D-focused nonprofits, and I have 1 or 2 government customers. The CDC is one of the main groups that I work with. But I very much am speaking through kind of an enterprise or corporate filter, and that sort of matters. If you need to understand my bias as I stand up here on stage and tell you things. And the other thing is that I think it's my people, the corporate types and the suit types, who are going to be a measurable percentage of the life science community that I think is going to start popping up at meetings like this. So, a little bit of backstory on why I'm here and why I'm not actually working right now. So, the interesting thing right now is that for a lot of the most interesting life science research, it cannot be done without hardcore IT. Very, very hardcore IT, and I've got some pictures and some examples. And the nice thing about the type of work I do, I didn't really tell you about my company. I'm not going to do the sales pitch, but we work as consultants right at the intersection of where there's a hairy scientific problem and a hairy IT need, and we're in and out of maybe 40 different groups or companies or organizations or government labs a year, so we get to see how different groups of smart people tackle the similar problems. What it also means is that we're very good canaries. We tend to hit the pain points first before the sort of mainstream industry hits them. So I was looking, every time I end the year, I try to sort of recap, what was the most pain in the ass consulting work that I had to do, in the prior year. And I can tell you, storage is boring, compute is boring, cloud is easy. The single biggest pain point that I have right now is petascale data movement, petascale data sharing, and how to compute on data when my terabyte instruments are in site A and my storage might be in site B. So if I'm looking at this stuff, I'm actually building science DMZs. I've got the first pharmaceutical company of mine that I'm going to get to connect to Internet 2 sometime in December. I've got a lot to show you about our interesting corporate-approved science DMZ coming up. But in particular, I do want to acknowledge, a lot of this stuff, the science DMZ concepts, a lot of the training, ESNET and Internet 2 have already been fantastic for our community. I would candidly say the amount of information that ESNET and Internet 2 provides for free at low-cost workshops and seminars and webinars, rivals boot camps and training sessions that I've paid a few $1,000s to attend and go to. So I want to start off with, in general, the single biggest problem in life science now is that we have an incredible array of what I call terabyte scale instruments. I'm going to show you pictures of genome sequencers because genome sequencing is kind of the sexy topic right now. It's also one of the high volume topics, but it's not just genome sequencing. This is the confocal microscope. This is an MRI machine. This is an HD video camera that an agricultural group is putting on their combines to do real-time trait analysis in the field. This is the video cameras they're putting on mice cage so that they can analyze how the mice move and what their emotions are. The single biggest driver for us is not only do we have terabyte scale instruments, these terabyte scale instruments are dirt cheap Anybody can get them, anybody with a grant can get them, and they're actually being commoditized at a faster rate than sort of IT products in Moore's Law. So we have this tremendous pile of terabyte scale instruments coming our way. So this is an old school, 2000 era genome sequencer. The reason why I wanted to show it to you is if you look underneath the bench, this was already back in early 2000. We already had to stuff 24U server racks into the wet lab environment just to support the data being slung off these instruments. So this is back 2005, 2006, something like that, and it's only gotten an order of magnitude worse. So if I continue with the Illumina trend, Illumina is kind of one of the heavy players right now, but the cool thing about this technology is that the rate of innovation in this space is so amazing that the company that's leading today is probably not going to be the company that's going to be leading tomorrow. So this is a very, very fast-moving market. These are the current sort of array of genome sequences on the market. That NextSeq 500 is small enough, you can compare it roughly to the size of a desktop PC. It's amazing how quickly these things are shrinking. So at the other end of the scale, Illumina just announced, there's some asterisks there, if you buy 10 of these things and you array them in a certain custom way, they call it a HiSeq X10. This is Illumina's claim for the first realistic human genome that costs $1,000 and covers 30x coverage. The asterisk here is that if you actually do the math, this instrument only produces a $1,000 genome if you basically run it 24/7. So that's an interesting thing to think about because my pharmaceutical and biotech customers probably don't have enough samples and enough use cases to drive an X10 24/7. However, there's a ton of interesting hospital, research communities, and universities that are probably going to be buying and deploying these platforms. And so I'm going to be talking about a real-world example where I've got a pharmaceutical company that's thinking about partnering with a university and going in on a 50-50 joint ownership of something like this. That immediately introduces a terabytes per week data movement problem because the instrument platform is going to be at the university most likely. The scientists, the compute, and the storage are going to be in the cloud, remotely on premise. So we're already starting to see this genomic stuff driving sort of geographically disparate computing problems. And this is not a Photoshop mock-up. There's people in the room who have these things sitting in their desk right now. This is a USB-attached genome sequencer that fits in the palm of your hand. This is the type of stuff, and the cool thing is that, it's not just, from an IT perspective, this is not scary. The technology underpinning this stuff, the nanopore stuff, it's simply an amazing time to be doing life science right now. The rate of innovation that's happening in our space is just blowing away what we're doing on the IT and infrastructure side. So I want to sort of set the stage. That was kind of the sort of our world of cheap and expensive terascale instruments. This is the cliche problem, a picture that I show that makes storage vendor drools. This is what happens when IT fails to do their job. Scientists aren't dumb. Scientists have departmental credit cards. They'll go out and route around you if you're an obstacle. This picture, I can't tell you what lab it was taken in, 100 terabytes of primary instrument data, stored on USB drives, sitting right next to a sink and sitting underneath a chemical bath shower. They track what data is on what drive by looking at the magic marker numbers and going back to a laboratory notebook. And by the way, the PI who bought these things thought that they were RAID protected and mirrored. They're not. There's 2 drives in there that are striped. So they've actually doubled their chance of catastrophic data loss just by buying this instrument. Or sorry, just by going to Staples or Best Buy and buying these drives. So the meta position right now is that it's kind of a scary time to be doing IT or infrastructure in the life sciences. The meta problem is that the rate at which the science is changing is occurring at an order of magnitude faster than I can refresh my data centers or build a scientific computing platform. The example that I like to use is my most aggressive and best funded biotech customers can do a major technology shift every 2 years. The pharmaceutical companies, 5 to 7 years, we can do some major dinking around with our infrastructure. The problem is that the science is changing month to month. I could sit down with a scientist and ask her what she's doing today, and she'll be very clearly able to articulate her needs, her growth patterns, her consumption patterns. She very likely will not be able to tell me what she'll be doing 6 months from now, 18 months from now, let alone 2 or 3 years down the road. So the central problem that I have is that I need to design scientific computing environments that can support scientific, open-ended, discovery-oriented research for a period of 2 to 7 years in the face of an environment where the scientists can't even articulate what they're going to be doing 18 months from now. And just the rate of innovation, it's absolutely amazing. But at the same time, as an IT person, it's a very, very sort of scary time. There's a lot of opportunities to mess this up in quite a bad way. So I've already talked over this slide here. I need to design systems that I think will support scientists for a number of years in the face of an incredibly mutable scientific application and technology environment. So the easy period is over. Back in the 90s and 2000, we shoved a lot of storage and compute into telco closets. We wedged a lot of stuff into the wet lab. That doesn't work anymore. This is the new scale that we operate. This is about 2,000 cores and I think 3 petabytes of storage. This is servicing less than 18 scientists. So this is the type of scale that we're operating at. Petascale storage, data center, co-location, racks and racks of high-density servers, supporting a relatively small but very, very needy R&D community. So the related problem that we have, and I often mangle the language when I talk about this, let's see if I can get the words right. It has never before been easier for a scientist to either generate or acquire vast amounts of data. There's the Human Genome Project, there's the UK 10K project, there's the 1,000 Genomes Project, and there's even a 100,000 Genomes Project. There are petabytes of information on the internet that it would be a legitimate business request or a legitimate scientific need for a scientist to want to download and do something interesting with that data. The rate and ease at which scientists can legitimately acquire vast amounts of data is going up at a rate that greatly exceeds the way that the IT industry is making disk drive platters larger. I'm still mangling the language, but it's just to say that the rate and lack of friction at which we can acquire data is growing way faster than storage vendors are making disk products bigger. And there's an inflection point that has already been passed. We already delete data. We already triage data. Even the most conservative pharmaceutical companies in the United States right now will delete primary data because they've done the math, and we know we can go back to the -40 freezer and repeat the experiment. That is much cheaper than keeping the data online forever and ever and ever. So it wouldn't be a technical talk if I didn't show you a scary graph. So this is scary graph number 1. This is scary graph number 2. At the end of the day, what the NIH does is they do a really nice job of tracking the insane rate of commoditization in the genome sequencing space. This stuff is dropping and dropping and dropping and dropping, and it's dropping faster than traditionally you've seen sort of IT innovation drive as well. So the downside is there's a lot of risks. There's a lot of risks. I won't talk over it. If we screw it up, we're in a very bad position. Scientists are vocal. They'll let you know when you screw it up. So talking a little bit more about trends here, I'll go quickly through this. I almost thought about deleting it. The interesting thing here on the DevOps and org charts is the effect that it's going to have on both the scientists and the IT professionals. So the social contract between IT and research is changing forever. IT is no longer the gatekeeper and provider of solutions. The control is very clearly moving into the hands of the biologists and the scientists. You can blame the cloud for this. A lot of this is the sort of capability you gain from the DevOps environment, the heavily automated, heavily orchestrated, scriptable everything stuff. People have seen what you can do on Amazon with 3 people, orchestrating hundreds of thousands of servers on the cloud. That technology is now trickling down to the enterprise, and it's very, very valuable to us. The interesting thing is that it's a new obligation for the scientists. They need to understand the new capabilities that are present so they can clearly articulate their needs. A scientist who is unable to understand the cloud and the value of this virtual everything is going to be unable to effectively deploy her scientific tools in the future. The flip side is I'm talking to IT people, and I'm candidly saying, if you're a sysadmin or an IT person right now and you can't code or you can't script, you're going to have trouble finding a job in the next couple of years. And I don't mean code in the way of C++ or anything like that. You've got to be able to use the glue stuff, the Perl, the Python, the Ruby, the JavaScript. It's a very, very interesting time to be both a researcher and an IT professional in this space. Compute is going to be easy. I haven't been challenged by a compute problem in years. It's very easy to acquire, buy, and deploy the amount of compute power you need to solve a scientific problem. I'm very happy this has been boring for a long time because there are other things that keep me up at night. So the only real trend here, I wanted to sort of give you something specific, is that if you buy into my hypothesis that we're building IT infrastructures that work for years in the face of science that's changing very, very quickly, what you're starting to see that translate to is a move away from blades and high-density servers. If you're looking 2 or 3 years down the road and you see Hadoop or coprocessor cards or GPUs, what's happening is you can't stuff a lot of disk drives into a blade. You can't stuff a bunch of GPU cards into a blade. If you're trying to defensively hedge against an unknowable scientific future, what you're probably going to end up doing is you're going to be buying servers that are a little bit fatter and a little bit bigger, because down the road you can stuff interesting things into them. So that's the example here where my new standard compute platform tends to be 2 to 4U because I can fit more stuff in down the road. This example here is showing a lot of disk spindles, imagining an HDFS or Hadoop use case. Same thing applies for all of the different PCI stuff that you might be sticking into a server. That's everything from a Intel coprocessor PHY card to some of those interesting Fusion IO flash cards or things that accelerate databases. We just don't know what we're going to be needing 2 or 3 years down the road. But I can fairly confidently state that I probably will need servers that will accept exotic PCI devices in the future. So I'll buy slightly fatter machines to accommodate that. Network is where it gets interesting. This is the single biggest pain point that I have. Petascale data movement is essential if we're going to actually be able to use all the data that we're generating with these inexpensive instruments. And the problem is that I work in the corporate world where they're incredibly friggin' smug about 10 gig. These guys have no experience at all at 40 gig or 100 gig. And my central problem is this. I could do an end run around IT. If they're blocking me on compute and storage, it's very easy for us to go over their heads. R&D money can buy stuff. I can stand up a pirate data center and make the scientists happy. You cannot do an end run around the networking people. These are the people who run the firewalls, they run the enterprise, they run the core. You have to have their active and engaged participation. So the problem and I've already talked over this slide, it's very, very common because of our scale for me to have 1 or 2 scientists who have compute and storage needs that dwarf the entire organization that employs them. I'm now at the point in 2014 where I might have individual biologists who have high-speed networking requirements that dwarf what the campus has been able to provide or what the organization has been able to provide. And it's proving to be very, very difficult to have those 40 gig and 100 gig conversations with the sort of corporate folks. The corporate folks are less exposed to the R&D folks. They're used to driving the design and driving the discussion. They don't like it when scruffy people come in and start saying bro and perf sonar and science DMZ and oh, maybe there's a cheaper way to do this that doesn't involve Cisco. They don't like that. It's a very, very difficult environment to work in. So I'm actually getting close to time, so I actually wanted to tie this up with sort of a real world example. So I've already talked about this. A global pharmaceutical company with compute and storage in one area, scientists and terascale instruments in one area, and they're thinking about buying a certain % share of an X10. So this is where Internet 2 and other things come to the example here. The example here that we're doing is we're using Internet 2 AL2S to get a 10 gig connection to I2. That's great because it satisfies a business need to be able to talk at high speed to other I2 participants. But at the same time, we're also using Internet 2 to buy a 10 gig path to a port at a particular switch at a particular data center in Virginia where Amazon happens to expose their direct connect service, where with a little bit of a cross connect cable, I now have a 10 gigabit private path into the Amazon cloud. If I have time, I'll talk a little bit more about this cloud architecture. There's a number of drivers for why life science is moving into the cloud. The single biggest driver is not economics. It's actually capability. And I think the future of life science involves a lot of collaboration between entities who have a very tricky trust relationship. You might be competing with them in one area and collaborating them within another area. In that sort of environment, you're never going to bring an outsider into your firewall. You're never going to give them VPN credentials. One of the bigger drivers for the sort of industrial life science environment is that the cloud is becoming a neutral meeting ground for people who sort of want to work together on a temporary basis but don't necessarily want to open the VPN or open the internal kimono to their competitor. So let me see how I'm doing here. I've got about 3 minutes. Oh, this is really what if I end here, I'm fine. So I have to fight a lot of battles. I got one Science DMZ 10 gig Internet 2 project approved by this pharmaceutical company. I was not able to get the Science DMZ hardware stack approved that I wanted. The only thing I'll say about this diagram is the cost of the equipment that you see on this slide is 4 times more than the cost of the Internet 2 connection coming in from the street. I was able to pick my battles, though. If you notice here, there's only one victory for me. I managed to get perf sonar into the discussion. So for the first, sort of Science DMZ deployment, we managed to sneak perf sonar in there. But I'm going to have a number of interesting conversations with the vendors upstairs in the sponsor pavilion because I want to know exactly how much money I wasted out of the R&D budget by going with the full checkpoint, the full Cisco. This is the type of stuff where this is where industry meets academia. I can't succeed without the buy-in of global risk management, global infrastructure, global engineering. This is what I had to agree to get them comfortable. On the plus side, they're very excited and engaged and happy because for the first time, we're a business case that actually needs 10 gig networking and faster. So they've actually been great allies to work with, but it's just taking time. All right, I've got about 2 minutes left here. Maybe I'll do my little buzzkill thing. Unfortunately, this is where I think I might lose some friends. I'm fairly cynical on the state of software-defined networking in my world. I drilled down into SDN about a year or 2 ago, and really what I came out with it is that, okay, if I throw away my switches or I replace the OS on my switch, what I end up with is an API that controls port forwarding behavior on a particular switch. Candidly, that's not enough of a value to justify any sort of deployment in my world. I need software-defined networking to do more than port forwarding behavior on a single switch before it'll ever become real in my world. So my take is that my gut feeling is the software-defined networking stuff is the future. The single most impressive example I've ever seen of it was actually the Internet 2 AL2S portal thing, where you can go online and via a simple web page, make connections between entities. I think I will see SDN in my world in point solutions. I'll see it in OpenStack deployments. I'll see it in sort of cloud environments, it's not going to go into the enterprise. They would throw me out of the room and laugh at me if I went into a room and said, oh, by the way, throw away all your existing network equipment or load this interesting OS, onto your system. And by the way, you get an API. That doesn't cut it for me right now. All right, I'm almost out of time. I think on the storage stuff, I'm going to skip this, except to say the biggest change for us is petabyte scale storage is no longer risky. You can buy petabyte volumes of storage from anybody. It's no longer a big crazy thing. The most exciting storage news right now is actually the stuff that's happening in the middle. The expensive stuff from the tier 1 vendors, you can build a petabyte usable for a few tens of thousands of dollars if you're talking, ZFS on commodity hardware. The interesting actions in the middle. One of my favorite companies right now is this Infinidat company that, it's basically an appliance that drop ships from Israel. It's got a petabyte usable with a 10 gig NIC on the back. That's it. Just roll it into your enterprise and just plug it in, and you can do some interesting stuff. This picture is actually from the Broad Institute, one of the sort of bigger, definitely top 3 genomic research institutes in the US. All right, I'm going to skip object storage, except to say it's the perfect solution for long-term storage of scientific data. The problem is that our burden of legacy applications means that it's going to take years and years and years before we sort of all transition over onto object storage. I'll skip the cloud stuff. I've already talked over this. My main point on the cloud stuff was to say that the drivers are more than economic. The primary drivers are capability and collaboration. I've already showed that slide. All right, I'm out of time. Screw it. I'm very particular about not wasting the time of others. I'm going to skip the watch out stuff. I'd rather end on time than talk at you for a couple of extra minutes. So hopefully I've stunned you senseless. I've prepared you for the deluge of people that I think are going to come in the next couple of years. And obviously, if this topic was of interest of you, there's a much bigger slide deck and a much longer talk that I think will be archived that was recorded yesterday. Thank you so much for your attention. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. It's like watching the high-speed airplane fly Mach 2. I'm still stuck at the SDN slide, and the talk's already over. So it's still just coming in. It's not done yet. So thank you very much, Chris. Next, we would like to invite Avis Yates Rivers to come and join us. Avis comes to us from Sit With Me initiative. Works with NCWIT. And who we have to thank for the great red chair being here this week. So I'll put the red chair in front. So as you can see, I don't know how many of you attended the 1:30 panel, but there was a lot of people who have joined us and showed us support for diversity in IT. So please join me in welcoming Avis to the stage. Avis.
Thank you, ENDER.
Thank you.
How are you?
Great. Thank you.
Well,
all yours.
I'm still trying to catch up to Chris. I know you all know everything he said. Most of it was a mystery to me. How are you? Good afternoon. Good morning. It's so good to be here. How's everybody? This has been a great conference. I had just a little snippet of it, but I've checked it out and checked you all out, and you're doing some great things. Congratulations to you, Internet 2, and to my all new best friends that I had dinner with last night. I really, truly enjoyed it, and your treatment of me has been superb, so thank you for that. So as you've heard, I'm Avis Yates Rivers, and in the daytime, I'm the CEO of a technology company based in Somerset, New Jersey. Come January, I will be a 30-year tech CEO, and it's been an incredible, incredible ride. But what I'm talking to you about today is my passion. I believe that we should all utilize our God-given resources, talent, time, energy to something bigger than ourselves. And I'm truly passionate about opening up the invention of technology to everybody. Male, female, young, old, black, white, Hispanic, Native American. It's not going to be as good as it can be until we all participate. We've seen that in other things. We've seen that in sports. We've seen that in baseball, tennis, golf. It's when these pastimes became more inclusive and more diverse that we really saw how good a Serena Williams can hit that ball. Right? And so what I want to do is talk to you a little bit about what we're doing at NCWIT, who NCWIT is. How many people know about the National Center for Women in IT? And how many of you are members or representing member organizations? I see some proud hands up there, so thank you for that. And for the rest of you, if you are not sure if you're a member of NCWIT or you would like to be, I can show you how to do that as well. And so I'm standing next to our red chair. This is a pretty heavy, pretty sturdy red chair. But it's just an icon. It's just a symbol of the mission that we're all about, and that is to increase the meaningful participation of women and people of color in the invention of technology. And we take a very strong stance on innovation. It's not about consuming. We know that many women and people of color consume this technology that's been invented. But we're talking about bringing a diverse set of perspectives and ways and approaches to solving problems to the invention of technology, because it's when we do that that we're going to change the world. And so I brought you a little bit about a chair's life. And I know you've seen these numbers. Anna did a phenomenal job on Monday in telling you what the numbers are and why it's a problem. You know, we know that women occupy more than half of the US professional occupations, but only about a quarter of the US technical occupations. And even less when you're talking about actual design of software. And then when you get down into that senior leadership role, think CTO, CIO, VP of R&D, you know, it's only 5% of women who are leading the design and innovation in America today. And we just feel that that's a problem because of what I just said. We don't know how good it's going to be, because, you know, we know who's inventing technology. At NCWIT, we crawl the US patent databases and we use some gender matching software, and we can identify of those categories on your left side, how many of those patents that have been filed that have come from females, only males, and then cross-gender teams. And you see we've still got a lot of work to do. Over 87% of those IT patents are still male-dominated. And we want to change that. And so we had to figure out what was going on. NCWIT was chartered in 2004 by the National Science Foundation, who convened 3 thought leaders, Lucy Sanders, who's the current NCWIT CEO, Telly Whitney, who's the CEO of Anita Borg Institute, and Bobby Schnabel, who you all know here at Indiana University. He's a superstar. And the thought was, there's a problem, because the numbers have been declining from a high in the mid-'80s of about 37% of female participation. The numbers were declining rapidly. And we didn't know why. And so the federal government saw this as an issue, not just for the day, but for the future, because we all feel that our competitiveness as a nation is associated with these numbers. Who is going to fill the millions of net new technology jobs that US corporations are creating every day? So what we intended to be right at the very beginning was a research center. And so lots of money has gone into the study of the problem. And we address it from the full pipeline. So from K through careers is what we are studying every day. And so we know that the problem isn't that technical women are broken. And the problem isn't that technical men are the enemy. Some days they might seem like it, but we know they really aren't. The culprit is societal bias, and we are all biased in some way. We have this online interactive study that you can do to determine just how biased you are. But we all have bias. And why? Because society has created us to be that way. So the research says that if I asked you to pick out the computer scientist in the photo in this old GoDaddy ad, you probably would not pick the pretty lady in pink. I wouldn't, you know, nobody would. So we have been made to believe that computer scientists and computer engineers are white males. That's what society has fostered in us, because that's what we see represented and manifested. But societal bias is caused by these schemas, you know, these shortcuts that our brain creates to allow us to process all the information that's bombarding us all day, every day. These shortcuts, however, is what causes unconscious bias, because we take all that data that we've ever seen about the face of technology, and we're going to shortcut it. It's got to be the white guy sitting right over there. Yeah. But these shortcuts can also make us miss some really good information. So what am I supposed to do? What can I do? What can you do? Because this is a problem that is impacting our entire nation, and it's something that we can all do to help solve it. So here's some of the things that research has borne out, things that you can physically actually do. We know that if you think of your organization that you represent today, if it's old, 20, 50, 100 years old more, it was an organization that was created by white men for white men. So that has been the culture. It's logical. And so to change a culture is one of the hardest things that you can do because it's very ingrained. And that's where we see subtle threats, inequities, the way job descriptions are written are gendered. Our researchers can look at a job posting or a job description that you may put out there and can tell you whether or not you're going to get a good female or minority response to that ad or to that job description because they're gendered. So you have to start becoming very aware and making diversity part of your DNA and fusing it into your culture. You also want to measure technical women's participation. We need to see more women in those leadership roles, more women who are actually designing and creating the new technology. Project management, business analysis is great, but that can't be where all the women are, right? I was so glad to see Carrie up here today. Yay! Congratulations, Carrie. But that's what we need to see more of. And you see how she interacts, even with the all-male panel that was sitting next to her. Women just approach things differently. We need training. Everybody needs training, but it's not enough just to get unconscious bias training. You really also need to begin to implementing it step by step into your environment. Foster inclusive team meetings, foster more encouraging environments. Because as hard as it is to get women into the tech field, we lose them 56% of the time by the time they reach mid-career. So that's why so few of them are reaching those senior leadership levels. And that's twice the quit rate of men. And before you start thinking they're going home to have babies, that's not what the research shows. The research shows that they're leaving a hostile work environment, and many of them are leaving the field. So that's where we come in. NCWIT, you see on this slide the names of every one of their members. NCWIT is a community of change agents. And in that community, we equip you with the resources necessary to affect change within your organization. We do that in 5 alliances. So if you're representing a university, you're in the academic alliance. There's no cost to join NCWIT. So you want to go right back and make sure that that happens if you're not a member. If you're a nonprofit, you're a member of the K-12 Alliance. And this is where you think of the nonprofit organizations like Girl Scouts, Girls Inc., Girls and Boys Club, 4-H, and all of these organizations that actually touch the girls and the boys. At NCWIT, we don't actually touch the women or the girls, but we empower the organizations and we fund the organizations that do. And with that particular alliance in K-12, we reach every girl in the United States. And so what we've learned is that we have to start fostering this whole idea and notion and love and interest in computing at a very, very young age. The one program where we do touch the girls is our National Talent Pipeline Development Program called Aspirations in Computing. If you know of any high school girl anywhere and within your circle who has a demonstrated interest and leadership ability in computing or in engineering, ask her to check out Aspirations on the NCWIT site. That's where we award high school girls all across the country and just helping them to persist, because oftentimes they're the only one or one of very few in their computer science classes in high school and then in college. So that particular program started about 7 years ago, and we had 30 girls apply online. This last season, we had 1,200 girls apply online. And over those 7 years, we have grouped them, we have built them their own community on Facebook, and they stay connected, and we stay connected with them. And so our academic alliance members attract them into their universities and provide scholarships. Our workforce alliance members provide them internships and jobs. And so it's just allowing this groundswell of new, fresh talent into the pipeline. And so they'll be there when those jobs are being needed to be filled. Workforce alliance members are very, very important because they're trying to cultivate change within their organizations, trying to make those environments more friendly and less hostile. And so that's probably the only place where you get all the tech industry companies together to collaborate, sitting right next to each other. And we're known for our resources, a lot of research, and everything is evidence-backed. So we provided programs in a box, like how to supervise technical women in a box. Everything is there for you. You just download it, brand it, and run with it. I like to say add water and stir. Lots of studies, scorecards, top 10s, talking points. Over 150 resources are available to you for free at ncwit.org/resources. We encourage people to download them, use them as broadly as possible. And so Sit With Me was born a couple of years ago. What we needed to do, what we recognized as part of the problem was not too many people knew what was going on. Not too many people knew that we indeed had a problem. And so there wasn't much going on within the tech community to fix it. And so we engaged a New York City advertising agency to come to the board meetings with a couple of campaign ideas. And Sit With Me was unanimously chosen to be our outreach and advocacy campaign. You see, we wanted a physical, tangible item. In this case, it's a red chair. Why? Because we want you to sit for and in support of technical women. And we want you to sit and validate women's technical contributions in the industry. We want you to sit to take a stand, just like Rosa Parks did at the front of that bus in Montgomery, Alabama in 1955. So it's kind of symbolic like that. You can make a stand and take a very important stand by sitting. And that's as simple as it gets. It's complex, but it's very simple. We want this red chair to become just as pervasive and well-known as the pink ribbon, because in the beginning of that particular symbol, nobody knew what it meant, but now everybody knows what that pink ribbon means. And we think that this red chair will have that same level of penetration if we all get involved. And so what we're looking to do now is to take this outside of our community. And I've got lots of pictures showing you how different members of the NCWIT community has utilized the red chair. We foster Sit With Me events, just like this, where we just bring the red chair. And I'm honored to be the national presenting spokesperson for Sit With Me. So I go around the country and have this chair shipped everywhere within our member community, be it corporate or academic or nonprofit, and just engage people to just come and sit down and tell me your story and tell me what you can do individually or representing an organization to help to solve this problem. Because you see, we only have 10 years left. When NCWIT was founded, we did so with a 20-year sunset clause, hoping very much that we'd have this problem solved in 20 years. Because, oh, by the way, it's not just that we want more women and people of color inventing technology, because we do, but we don't have enough white men to fill all of the technology jobs that are being created. So really, this is an issue of supply and demand. And when we looked to see who was missing, it was women and people of color. So the community has been doing their own grassroots Sit With Me campaigns over the last 3 years, and it's been pretty interesting and exciting to see how some of them have done it. And so you see Oregon State University here. That's the president of Oregon State University, and that young gymnast, female gymnast, is an engineering student who's balancing this heavy red chair on the balance beam. I don't know about you, but I couldn't balance me on the balance beam, let alone holding a heavy red chair. But this is just showing you over and over again how the academic community has really risen to the forefront in doing things with a Sit With Me event. We go to conferences. We went to SIGC and South by Southwest and just on and on. This was the Massachusetts Conference for Women, where we supported the Girl Scouts and had thousands of people sitting in the red chair over the course of that event. This is an Entrepreneurial Alliance member, and Spot Exchange. You know, they just went really, really overboard. And so this happens to be a New York City event. I moderate a lot of panels, and you know, it's just about getting the word out. And so I take my red chair. I was asked to moderate a panel, but if you ask me to come, I'm going to bring a chair with me. So hopefully there's room for both of us. Microsoft had 30 events on the same day all across the globe at all of their locations, many of their locations. And that chair down in the middle there is in front of the Great Wall, so a piece of it. So it's just amazing what these members have done with these chairs. Again, all of the tech community, most of them, is sitting at the table. And it's important that now, in light of the recent diversity data disclosures, that everyone's recognizing, oh, we have a problem, which I'm very happy about. And we all knew what the numbers were there. We didn't need them to actually disclose them. But it is the first step in awareness, you know, and getting away from the denial. We're doing okay. We're not where we want to be, but we're doing okay. No, you're not. You know, no, you're not. And I am happy to see that these numbers were disclosed, because now that means that you really want to do something to try and change it. So we had Sheryl Sandberg leaning in on that red chair at Facebook. And again, just on and on and on, how different people have been photographed in the red chair. You too can have your own Sit With Me campaign. Lots of templated stuff up on the NCWIT site, the sitwithme.org site, and you can just utilize our vast library and experiences over the last couple of years to create something meaningful for yourself. In addition to Shaq sitting in that chair, no, it's this chair, it just looks like a miniature version of it under him. But we've got Glenn Close and Chelsea Clinton and Donna Brazile and lots and lots and lots of people who have sat in the chair. And we are looking forward. We're looking to a brighter new future. And I believe that we've got enough brain power in this room today to solve the problem. So what can you do? What can you do? I thank all of you who have sat in the chair so far this week. And if you haven't done so yet, it'll stick around all afternoon if you'd like to do so. But learn from what we've learned so far over the last 10 years. And I've been on the NCWIT board for all of those 10 years. And I am amazed at how much has already been done. Still a lot more to do, but we're at a tipping point now. We're at some inflection points now where we're going out after some big bets, and you can be part of that. Thank you for having me. I thank you for being here.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Anna Hunsinger, Vice President, Community Engagement, Internet 2.
I went right down to 0. Yes.
Thank you very much, Avis, and thank you everyone for showing your support for the past few days. I'll be brief. I know many of you are very, very hungry. So I would like to conclude our general session. First, let me thank again ESNET and Indiana University, Brad, and everybody from IU. Many, many thanks. Let's give them a hand. Thank you. We hope to see you at our next event. It will be in April in Washington, D.C., our 2015 Global Summit. The call for participation is now open. You'll see the details on the website. We just extended the deadline for proposals and sessions and so forth till November the 7th. And then last, I'm looking forward to also seeing you for the 2015 Technology Exchange, to be held in the wonderful city of Cleveland, Ohio. This event is being hosted by one of our Internet 2 members, Case Western Reserve University, and also with great support and partnership from the Ohio Valley Internet 2 Consortium and ORNet, and with local support from One Community. So we look forward to seeing you there. Some of the things have been made available now, like the live footage from some of our speakers on Monday, so please take a look at those. And anyway, thank you very much, and have a wonderful rest of your time in Indianapolis. Have a wonderful rest of your day, week, and year. Thank you.